That is the dream that's given to entrepreneurs. You can work from anywhere. You work from the beach on your laptop, which sounds great. But when you look at the reality of it, he's chained to his laptop. He's stressed out. I'm not saying that you shouldn't grow your business, but I am saying that you should start building wealth sooner rather than later. And I will show you that it's a lot simpler than you probably think. The reality is, though, that you need both. You need, number one, income outside of your active business. That is the very first goal. Income outside of your main business. That's the first step to wealth and freedom. Hello, and welcome to What to Do with All the Money You're Making. By the end of today's presentation, you are going to see why wealth is better than having a giant business. You will see how to invest, when to start investing, and the rewards that it could possibly yield for you. A couple of disclaimers before we dive in. This is not financial, legal, or investing advice. I will use phrases like could, possibly, may, might. That is because it is not a guarantee that you will see the same results as we talked about today. However, if done correctly, investing can change your life, and that is what I'm going to show you today. So let's dive right in. I'm Jeweliet Grace, and I'm a 5-time entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 16 years old. Eventually, many years later, I raised over $1 million in funding for a health startup, and I have sold a company. During that time period, I have been an M&A negotiator for 8 years. M&A means mergers and acquisitions, so that is helping facilitate large investment deals, being the negotiator for 8 years now. Nowadays, though, I am mostly retired thanks to the presentation I'm about to give you. And I work mostly on my social projects and my art. So if you look me up online these days, that's what you will see. With all that being said, let's dive in with an easy one. Why is wealth better than a $10 million company? As you can see, we have this nice gentleman over here. He's on the beach working on a laptop. That is the dream that's given to entrepreneurs. You can work from anywhere. You work from the beach on your laptop, which sounds great. But when you look at the reality of it, he's chained to his laptop. He's stressed out, and he's not even paying attention to what's going on around him. To me, that does not signal much enjoyment. That's what happens when you run a big company. However, when you start to build wealth, you are like this lady over here. You're on the beach and actually enjoying it. So you have freedom to live on your own terms. I'm not saying that you shouldn't grow your business, but I am saying, as you'll see through this presentation, that you should start building wealth sooner rather than later, and I will show you that it's a lot simpler than you probably think. So let's go further. What could money actually buy you? The first thing that increasing your income or your wealth overall can give you is stability. The number one issue that entrepreneurs have, I'm sure you face this, is a roller coaster income. You do your best to stabilize, you do your best to keep your ad campaigns and systems running, but inevitably you will face ups and downs in your income. And that creates a lot of anxiety, tension, stress. And so having wealth and investments alongside of your main business will allow you to have some stability. This will provide you with options. You can now work because you want to, not because you have to. And finally, it can buy you peace of mind. There are two main categories of building wealth. Today there is cash flow and wealth assets. Wealth assets can also be known as appreciation assets, but I like to call them wealth assets for simplicity. Cash flow assets are exactly what they sound like. These are assets that will generate you cash to live off of. They could pay you monthly, quarterly, or yearly, but generally they are some sort of asset that gives you money that you can then spend. On the other side, you have wealth assets. Wealth assets are things that are growing in value, but they don't necessarily pay you to live day to day. And there's a reason for that, and we're going to go over that. The reality is, though, that you need both. You need, number one, income outside of your active business. That is the very first goal that every single one of you guys should have. Income outside of your main business. That's the first step to wealth and freedom. Then, once you have that, you move on to wealth. Wealth is what gives you options for the future. Wealth is what allows you to retire from working. So when you start to build wealth, this is what it can generally look like. Wealth is not a later problem. It's not something that you do when you have 100,000 or $1 million in the bank. It's something that you should start building now. Because if you don't build now, as you see, year one, year two, three, four, five, you'll never get to this retirement on the beach. You will always be chained to your business. That is why investing is not something that you do once you already worked 20 years and you have a bunch of money. It's something that you start building now. Very similar to a business, you take small steps and you add to it little by little over time. And eventually you end up here. This could be your 5, this could be your 10, depending on how much you invest and how active you are with it. But eventually you end up here with the option to retire with freedoms. There are 4 financial buckets that we're going to be discussing today. The first is your operating business capital. That is pretty straightforward. That's how you run your business. The second is savings. That's a safety net. That is something that you have just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, you are protected. The third is cash flow assets, which we talked about 2 slides ago. Those are assets that will kick off cash, help you to live. And number 4 is wealth portfolio, wealth assets. Those are things that pay off in the long term and give you true stability and freedom in the future. So let's talk about how much to invest outside of your main business. I know investing into your company is all the rage. It's always about pumping more into ads. And if you care about yourself, buy this course. And if you support and believe in your visions, you'll spend 30 grand on another mastermind. And I'm not saying that any of those things are bad or incorrect. But what happens is a lot of people invest so much into their existing active business, which is essentially their daily job, and end up spending the rest of it on lifestyle things, cars, houses, etc., that they never invest. So there's a very simple rule that you can follow, which is to invest generally 5 to 10% of your income. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to do something with it every month, but it can mean you set aside 5 to 10% into an account, and maybe once a year, or every 6 months, or every quarter, you take that money and you invest it wisely, which I will show you how to do in the rest of this presentation. So if you're currently making $100,000 a year, you can invest $10,000. I know that sounds like a lot, but if that is too much for you, or you're like, I can't possibly live off of 90 if I invested 10,000. First of all, I would ask you why you're living so close to the edge of your means. But second of all, I would say, okay, start with 5% then. If you have 200,000, you invest 20, 500,000, 50,000, $1 million, 100,000. The thing is that 10% looks very different for everyone. So obviously, if you're starting from a higher income threshold, you'll be able to invest more and get further along faster. If you're starting from a lower income threshold, it will take you a little bit more time to get where you're going. But that does not mean that you should not start. It just means that we'll take a few smaller steps to get there. Start with what's realistic and consistent. Small, consistent investments over time can compound, and your future you will thank you for starting now. So money has different jobs, and similar to what we just talked about with the 4 different buckets, this is just an elaboration on that. Your income has, some of your money is going to go back into operating capital, some of your money is going to go into savings, some of them it's going to go into a pot for assets that will kick off more money now, and some of them are going to go into a wealth portfolio fund. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Now, there are a series of things that you should look at in an investment before deciding whether or not you should move forward with it. These are the key terms that you need to understand. You can screenshot this. I'm sure Nabil will give you guys the slide as well so that you don't have to memorize all of these, but just for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to quickly go over these terms. The first one is risk. That is the chance that something could go wrong or you could lose money. The second is immediate cash flow. When I say cash flow in today's presentation only, I am specifically referring to things that will produce income for you in a relatively short period of time. You'll see the difference between those in a few minutes. Time needed, that is how much it's going to take from you to be able to execute and get the results that you need. Some investments take a lot of your time. It's basically like having another day job. Capital, that is how much money you need to get started to acquire the assets. The overall return, that is different than a cash flow. The overall return is the total profit or benefit that you can expect by the end of your investment. So when you hear people say, yeah, I got a 10% return, that is the total amount that their investment grew over the lifetime of that deal. Liquidity, that is just simply how easy it is to get your cash back out. Some things, it takes months and months to liquidate your funds. Some things are pretty straightforward and easier. And the final category is complexity. This is basically how much skill and understanding of finance you need in order to execute the deals. Some investments and things that you'll come across are super complex. They can make a lot of money, but you basically have to be Warren Buffett to understand it. And some of them, like for example, buying a vending machine and placing it in a mall, is very straightforward. So those are the terms that we're going to be using as we move forward today. So this is the asset scorecard. That is all of the terms that we just went over into a scorecard. When you're looking at an investment, whether that is land, buying a business, stocks, or anything else, these are the things that you need to essentially grade. Now I have it as an example, X out of 10. So you assign a number, 1 out of 10, 5 out of 10, depending on your score. There are, for a disclaimer, much more complicated ways to do this, but for the intents and purposes of teaching, this is a pretty straightforward process. The categories look different for everyone. For most people, it looks like on the screen. The first is risk. The number one thing most people think about is, yeah, but I don't want to lose my money. So risk is the most important priority on their list. Then it is immediate cash flow. How much cash is it going to make me every month or every quarter? How much time is this going to cost me? How much money is it going to be required to do this? Then people start to think, okay, yeah, in over 5 years or over the lifetime, how much money will I make overall? And then, especially beginners, they don't tend to think about liquidity, complexity overall. However, my portfolio hierarchy looks a little bit different, and that is because I'm a little bit more advanced. I've done investments in the past, and I also have different lifestyle goals. I'll be transparent with you. My lifestyle goals are to work as little as possible. I do not like to be on the beach working on my laptop. I like to be free. I like to take care of my stepson with special needs. I like to go to the park and play swords with him. With that being said, this isn't to say that your scorecard will be the exact same, but just to give you an example that there are differences. The number one thing I'm solving for is time needed. What's the overall return? I don't really care so much about cash flow immediately because my needs are pretty much met. And then I think about how much capital it's going to cost me, liquidity risk, so on and so forth. You don't have to copy that, but I just wanted to show you a quick variation that things change depending on your goals. Okay, so let's dive into the specifics. I know so far you've heard me say cash flow assets, wealth assets. What the hell are you saying, lady? So let's be specific here. There are many different types of assets that can produce cash flow for you. I have narrowed this down into 2 simple categories after a decade of teaching this. So not to say that there aren't other things you can do, but for simplicity's sake, where I think most people should focus their energy and attention is 2 categories. The first is small end assets, very easy to understand. That is things like vending machines, ATMs, things that do not cost a lot of money or any and can produce some amount of profit. So for example, a vending machine in a mall might make $400 a month in profit. Are you rich? No, but 5, 6, 7, 10 of those, and you're like, wow, I'm actually making a pretty good money. So that is small end assets. The next category is what I like to call the middleman strategy. This is my favorite strategy because it costs $0 to do. And if you are a business person already, you can do this and start earning significant money very quickly. But you have not heard about these things being taught before. That is my job. I'm going to do that for you now. In essence, this is a very simple process of connecting one person to another person and you earning a percentage of that deal transaction. very easy one to understand is lenders. So business financiers, they will pay you 3 to 7%, sending them a referral that actually gets business funding with them. So there's a company called Ease Consulting, EAZE Consulting in the US. I believe they've now expanded into Europe. When they were first starting, I was working with them, and they pay referral fees for you send your friend that needs a new van, or they need business consulting, or they need some sort of business financing. They just want some extra cash in their business. They go to Ease Consulting, they do their application. Ease says, oh, yeah, no problem. I can get you $100,000 in capital. And then you earn 3 to 7% of that simply by introducing them. You don't need to work for Ease. You don't need to be a sales guy on the phone all the day. You just found out that your friend Cassandra wanted some capital for her business. She really needs to scale up her ads. She applied. She got approved. She got the money. Then you earn it. That is an introduction that could be done via email. I have done this and earned a significant amount of money myself, and tons of other people have as well. The second category that I find very interesting is payment processors. Payment processors, you probably didn't know this. That's things like Stripe, Clover, PayPal. But there are bespoke companies, like the one that I worked with called Kept Payments. Kept Payments is the CEO's name is Sarah. I have seen her work through a dozen different payment companies over the years and thrive and do incredibly well, but there was always issues with them until she came out with her own company. This is a very common in the payment world, that if you refer your friend who, let's say they have a $500,000 a year business, over to, let's call it Kept Payments, will offer you an ongoing commission called a residual. So it's paid off monthly. It's not just a one-time thing. An ongoing commission every single month based off of the volume of sales that your friend is bringing them. So for example, you're working, you're on whatever, and you hear someone go, oh man, I hate PayPal. They're always holding up my funds and things are being withheld. They're charging me up the ass with fees. I wish I had a better payment processor. And then you go, you know what? I actually have a lovely company. They've never held fees. They've got a bunch of fantastic terms. If you get approved, it'll really help you. And they're like, yeah, can you intro me? So then you send an email. You say, hey, Sarah, this is my friend Bob. Bob owns a plumbing company that does about $500,000 a year, but he's just fed up with PayPal. Can you help him? Sarah then does all of the work. She takes him through the application, she onboards him, etc. And then Bob gets approved. Bob represents $500,000 a year in transactions right now, and the payment processing company is going to pay you a very small percentage of that every single month. What does that mean in numbers, you ask? Let's go over it. I have a client who makes about $1 million a year in revenue, and that produces me about $300 to $400 a month in income for me. That's me. He switched over to payment processor. I don't manage the account. I don't do anything. All I did was make an introduction, and 4 years later, I'm still getting a $300 transfer into my bank account based off of the volume of his sales. Some months he has a really big month and he absolutely blows up, so I get closer to 400 or 500, but it still gets paid automatically. So let's look at some numbers. Focusing on the middleman strategy, this is something that anyone that has business connections or you're around business people can do. You don't have to do it full time either. You don't have to become a network marketer, somebody that's cold calling and being super sleazy about it. But as the opportunities come to you, as you hear your friends need certain things like financing or new payment processor or whatever, you can earn different fees. So let's look at that. If we were to add that up, 2 payment processors, assuming that they make about $1 million in revenue each, you could earn about $600 a month off of that. That could equal $7,200 per year. Again, all that you had to do was send an email intro because your friend already wanted to switch processors and you were smart enough to just know that you could earn a small commission off that. So imagine what an extra $600 a month, in addition to the money that you're making from your active business, but you have to clock in 9 to 5 to get that money. This is something that's going to come in even if you never work, you never open your laptop or do anything ever again other than have sending that one initial email. Let's continue on. Let's say that you're like, I like this middleman strategy. How else can I do this? What other kinds of things can I add? Let's say you have the one friend that needs business financing and they get a 50K loan. You can get about a 1 to sometimes even 5% referral fee depending on the deal that you cut. So that's $500. Okay. Let's say that you have, let's get a little bit more complex. Now you're starting to think about wealth and you're starting to hear people say, oh, I want investment deals, or I want to buy a company. And now you connect those two people. You're like, oh, I got a guy that's selling a cafe. And just to explain this one, I know it's not likely for all of us. You're like, Juliet, I'm not sitting around. People aren't trying to sell their companies around me all the time. But I'm here to teach you what you can do. This might be 10 years down the road, and then you remember this. You'll be like, oh my God, I remember I can earn a fee off that. Connecting investors, so people that have money, with the deal that they want or a deal that they invest in, you can earn a fee of 1 to 3%. So let's say that you know an investor, you connected him to a startup. For example, I had a startup. I raised 500,000, or excuse me, I raised over $1 million in funding from private investors, and I paid 7% for people to send me their investor referrals. So if they sent me Bob and Bob invested $500,000 with me, they earned a decent amount of money off that. And that is standard across the board. That's not something you need to be licensed for. It's not something that's hard to convince investors or people to pay. They're already doing this and they're already paying other people. That is the beauty of the middleman strategy. So let's say you did it, and let's say you got just really on the low end, you earned $7,500 off that deal, and you did one of those a year. And then let's say finally, my last one is land, which I'm going to go over in a few slides, so we'll leave that out for now. If you did 2 payment processors, right? That's it. Just 2 for the rest of your life. That's $7,200 a year that's going to come in. If you did 4, 5, that stacks up. 1 friend a year needs business financing, produces $6,000. 1 investor deal you do once a year or every 5 to 10 years, depending on what type of friends you have, you're earning $7,500. If you add all these things up, cash flow assets, that could be an extra $24,000 per year in income. It could be a lot more depending on what kind of friends you have and the networks that you're in and how much you pursue this. Now that's not nothing in terms of money. When we think about sovereignty, when we think about freedom and wealth and having options, that is the type of money that makes a difference. Because slowly you're replacing the money that you make by doing active work. And even if you're a business owner, I know it's glorified, I know we all love it, and it's better than working a 9 to 5, but you still are trading your money, your time for money. You just get to call yourself the boss. Now, I'm not saying to quit your business and pursue this only, but I am saying it slowly makes you have options. And that's what freedom and wealth is, options. If you have a third of your active income now replaced with cash flow income or passive assets, as we just described, it's like, okay, I only need to do this 2 more times, and I've replaced all of the money that I'm making now by working 80 hours a week and owning my own brand. Now you have options. You can keep running that brand if you love it, but you can take a year off and support yourself. Now, we've covered the cash flow assets. Let's move into future-oriented things, wealth assets. We are going to need wealth to retire. So there are 3 main categories of wealth, and you'll notice that crypto is not one of them. The first is real estate, that is rental, single-family homes, land. The second is stocks, which is the S&P 500, life insurance, the really boring stuff that you've probably heard your parents talking about. And the third is private equity. That is things like buying a business or investing in a startup. We're going to cover all 3 of these today briefly, but we're going to focus on my favorite wealth strategy because it's easy, does not require a lot of money, does not require a lot of management, but definitely provides for the future. And that is, drumroll please, land. Land can solve two problems at one time. The first is it appreciates over time. And the second, which you'll see on the next slide, is that it can produce real income for you. Let's talk about why land is so great. First is that it's a fantastic savings account, but better. Let's use an example. Let's say that you have $10,000 as an emergency savings and an emergency actually happens. You have to take $3,000 out because you broke your leg. What happens? You then have to pay the $3,000 back just to get it back to the 10,000 base point that you were at. Let's use land. If you buy a $10,000 piece of land and an emergency happens, you can get a collateral loan, which does not require credit because you use the land as the collateral, and you get the loan for $3,000. Yes, you still have to pay that $3,000 back, but the land is appreciating while you do that. So when you pay the $3,000 back, your land is not still worth $10,000. It might be worth $10,500, for example. And that's because land continues to appreciate. So you see why that's better than a savings account, is because even if you need the money out, you can go get it and your asset still grows. So the last reason why it's fantastic is, how do you get it? You can get traditional loans or you can use seller finance. Land is very easy to acquire with seller finance. In fact, I have bought all of my land in the US and across the world using seller finance. I have a guy named Doug who sells me all of it in the US. If you need his contact, you let me know. My favorite piece of land that he ever sold me was a $27,000 parcel in upstate New York, which I bought for $1,000 down, and my monthly payment was $434. I personally did not do anything with this land. I just let it appreciate. In fact, I didn't even go look at it before I bought it. Now, that's fine. That's fine with me because actually 4 years later, I'm going to sell that land for more than what I paid for it. I could afford the $434 payments per month, so it didn't hurt me during that meantime. All in cash wise, I'm about $13,000, and I'm about to sell the land for a lot more than I would pay for it. So I'm going to walk out profitable. I've never done anything. A fantastic savings account. If I wanted to really get extra bang for my buck, I would do this with my land, which I have done. I just didn't with that New York one. And that is to get my land to cash flow. There are three main ways to do this, and these are ranked by complexity. The first is campsites, that some guy with an RV wants to come and park and sleep there on your property, or guys with tents. You can register your land on sites like HipCamp, which is HIPCAMP.com, and people will pay you $25 a night to come park on your land. That's low maintenance. I never check on it. I don't worry about people overstaying and they didn't pay, because either way, I'm going to own the land. It was a good investment. If I get $25 every now and then, that's just an extra bonus. So you can actually make a decent amount of money, especially if it's in a decent location, by having large campsites and adding amenities, etc. You can get fancy with it, but my point is you don't have to. The second thing is yurts and glamping. This can cost a few $1,000s to set up, but it can make low six figures. Yurts do not require city electricity or city plumbing. You can get a water tank and a big truck comes, fills it up once a week or once a month, and you can get generators that will power your yurts. This is fantastic because you don't need permanent structure permits, so there's no timeline with the government to prevent you from doing this. And like I said, it's relatively low cost. Yurts can go for an average of $150 to $250 a night, which is not nothing. Like I said, I know people that are making low six figures off of their land doing this. The third is cabins and tiny homes. I've even seen people turn them into little micro retreats, which is fantastic. It does cost more money and you have to get permits for it. So I recommend that most people start and probably stay at the yurts and glamping. It's also really easy to get someone to manage that for you. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's a simple business model, so it's not something you have to worry about. And again, can produce low six figures. Even if it was just 50 grand a month, or 50,000 a year, that's not nothing, as I like to say. So your land is appreciating, but you're also getting the benefit of supplementing your main income. That is a double whammy, and that is why land is my favorite asset to tell people to buy. The first place I tell them to start. If you have any questions about land, feel free to message me. If you want to know Doug and get that connection so he can help you find some land, fantastic. And so I recommend that you start here. However, as you progress, there's a few other things you're going to hear about, and I just want to be thorough in my presentation. The next category of wealth is to buy a business or do private equity investments. There's a woman named Cody Sanchez who, if you don't know her, I highly recommend you go follow her. She really champions the buying a boring business, which is fantastic. Those are things like laundromats and vending machines, parking lots, things that are super, super easy to run and manage, and there's pros to it. Imagine if you bought a laundromat that's making $100,000 a year in profit, like she talks about a lot. Then you have $100,000 more dollars a year in profit. So that is amazing. And it appreciates, you can sell it for more than you bought it. But there are some cons. It can take 9 to 12 months to acquire a business. So if you have the money today, it could be 9 to 12 months before you're actually making money. It also requires more capital than, for example, land. Like I said, you can buy land for a few $1,000s down, or maybe even less than that. And you have all the benefits of land, whereas a business, you're going to need tens, actually, let's be realistic, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it correctly. And the third con is that it's complex. You're going to have a manager to run it for you, and guess who that manager is going to call when something goes wrong? I have bought a lot of businesses in my life, and I can't say I regret it because some of them produce a lot of money for me. But when I look back now at the amount of money it produced compared to the amount of time it cost me, I would have wished that I would have just bought more parcels of land and done more land activity than I would have bought businesses. I'm just being honest. My presentation is about sovereignty. That's freedom and optionality. Buying a business is essentially buying another full-time job, at least for a little while. That's fine if you know what you're getting into, but I just want to be realistic with you. The next thing that you're going to hear about in the wealth space is stocks. Now, I love stocks, and people are surprised to hear me say that. You are not going to become the richest person ever off of stocks. You need quite a bit of capital, a lump sum to begin with, to make it really worthwhile. But I still recommend it for most people because 5 to 8% annual returns is better than your 0.01% that you would get having it in a savings account. So it's better than nothing is my first point. And my second point is that it puts you in the mindset of acquiring wealth, of going from a working entrepreneur, someone who's literally changing their time for money, but just able to call themselves a boss, to someone who's thinking about the future and knows that one day they don't want to have to work, or at least not as much as they are now. So I think it's fantastic. And the third thing about stocks is that if shit goes wrong in your life, you can generally pull your money out in a day or two. So it's pretty liquid. Like I said, 5 to 8% returns, probably not going to change your life, but I still recommend it for everybody because it, again, is a first step. And that brings me to my next point. Wealth is small, slow steps stacked up over time. These are not things for when you have hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is not something for when you're 40 plus. This is not something that requires a lot of time and that's going to distract you from your main business. This is actually the purpose of business to begin with, is to develop wealth. Don't forget that. Don't forget that you got into business to have certain freedoms and options, and that owning a business often doesn't give you. So remember that you need to start acquiring wealth alongside of your main project. Let's tie this all together. We have talked about a lot of things today. The first is cash flowing assets. The main thing I want you to get out of assets that produce income is the middleman strategy. Go back and watch that in this presentation. And if you have any questions about it, I have many essays and many presentations about it on my website, which is jewelietgrace.com. Also available on Sovereignty on School. Look us up on School and join our free group there. The middleman strategy can produce a lot of extra income per year. I gave you the example of the payment processor who was a friend of mine that was making about $1 million a year. And on the back end of that, 4 years later, I'm still earning about $400 to $500 per month automatically to my bank account. So that's fantastic. That was one email introduction, and I never did anything else. Why aren't more people doing that? I think it's just a lack of education. Most people don't know that those options exist, but now you do. So if you have any questions about that, how to execute it, again, feel free to reach out to me or look on my website for more resources. The other thing that we talked about is wealth. Those are things that you can use to actually have a chance at retiring one day so that you're not that guy on the beach chained to his laptop. I've broken this down into 2 phases for you guys of what to focus on and where it will get you. The first is sovereign cash. This is for someone with no investing experience, no wealth experience. You've got a full-time business, you got a lot going on in your life. Your first goal is very simple: to establish some cash flow, some income outside of your main business. So I put this into a beautiful chart for you guys. You have your business, it's growing, it's thriving, but you also got some level of income outside of your main business as well. And when you do that, you have more freedom, you have more stability as your business fluctuates in income, as they all do. Your cash flow and assets can support you and keep things stable during that time period, and you have more safety. If you lose a big client or something happens over here in your main business, again, you have something that's completely separate from that can keep you safe. And I like to tell people, safety is sexy. I'm not in my early 20s anymore. Listen, the older I get, the more I love safety and stability. When I was young, I wanted to date the cool, hot guy who rode a motorcycle. And now I like the safe, bald guy with a beard. Okay, he is stable, and that's how you should think about wealth and moving forward through your life. You already have the hot, sexy guy with the motorcycle, and that's your business. That's exhilarating, that's exciting. But you need some level of safety and stability to balance it out, and that's what this presentation is all about today. Phase 2. This is the last stage for most of you guys. This alone can get you to be worth tens of millions of dollars. Let's look at it. Phase 2 is when you acquire a low-risk asset. So once you have outside cash flow, it's time to get an asset that will grow over time. So you have your main business, we talked about it, you have some cash flow outside of that, and now you buy a low-risk asset. Low-risk asset that I suggest is land. As we went over all the details as to why that was, like I said, go back in this presentation and watch that. Again, if you have any questions about land, feel free to reach out to me. There are other low-risk assets that you can purchase, of course, but this is what phase 2 looks like. You have your main project, cash flow and asset, and you have some sort of wealth asset, some sort of low-risk thing that's going to appreciate over time. And this third box here is what allows you to retire one day safely and not have to go back to work when you're 65 years old. Remember to acquire slowly. Investing 10% of your income can produce real benefits in just a couple of years. And the example that I gave you, the middleman strategy, the payment processor that pays me, that's something that can be done in a couple of months. You meet somebody, they want a new payment processor, you make the introduction, in a couple months you could be earning. I know that $500 a month isn't life-changing money for most of you guys watching this, but the goal is that income slowly starts to replace or at least equal your active income. And then imagine what kind of freedom you have there. You have this active income, this project that you're working on that you love, and then you also have income that's coming in regardless of the effort and regardless of your tasks. That's a fantastic place to be. Phase 1 rewards. Phase 1 is what we just talked about. Your business plus one extra thing that's producing income, or maybe a couple if you're smart. In 6 months, you should have income outside of your business. That will equal stability, which produces less anxiety. That's a fantastic benefit. And by the time that you get to phase 2, which is, let's go back and look at it, main business, cash flow asset, and some wealth, so some land. By the way, you could do cash flow and low risk assets at the same time. By the time you get to phase 2, you are this lady. You are on the beach, not a laptop or a phone in sight. You are living your best life. It gives you the option to retire. It gives you the option to be free and to work less. And that is the goal. But I know some people watching this will think that this is too complex, they're not smart enough, it costs too much money, they don't have time, that it's a problem for later. I understand that, but I just want to remind you guys that if you don't start acquiring wealth outside of your business, today I've made it easy, I've made it low cost, I've made it simple, but if you don't do that, you end up like this guy. And this guy is on the beach. Look at him. He's got bikinis walking by and he can't even see them or appreciate them. He is on the beach working on his laptop, the dream that was sold to entrepreneurs, but he's not actually enjoying the beach, my friends. And I don't want that to be you in 20 years, 10 years, 30 years. I want this to be you. So follow this plan and get here. If you don't follow this plan, you're going to end up here and you have no way out of it other than to start listening to presentations like this and start to acquire wealth. Hopefully, this answered a lot of questions that demystified the world of acquiring wealth. Hopefully, by now you can see that this is not that expensive, not that time consuming, and you don't have to be that smart to do it. For extra support, I have a free group on School called Sovereignty. Look us up there. And there's a few different courses available. First, I have the Sovereignty newsletter. This is a pay what you want newsletter. I put all of my best business lessons, life lessons, philosophy, fact-checking things that I think just need to be demystified into a newsletter, and I've made it pay what you want. These newsletters are long AF, and you can literally log in, you select the amount that you want to pay every single month. I did that because I want it to be accessible to everyone, and you get access to my best lessons. So that Sovereignty newsletter. I also have the Cash Flow Portfolio Program on School, which is what we talked about in this presentation, the middleman strategy, how to execute that, how to make that work with your existing business, and other things that you can do to get cash flow outside of your main business. Remember, that was step 1 that I told you. And the third thing that I have is Investing 101. This is phase 2. This is when you're moving on to acquiring assets and building wealth. So it literally goes in order. The newsletter for getting your toes wet, cash flow portfolio program for getting cash flow outside of your main business, and then finally Investing 101 when you're ready to start acquiring wealth. All of those are available on School. And if you're not on School for some reason, you can find me on all social media. My name, again, is Jeweliet Tangen. I usually go by Jeweliet Grace. And feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, anything, with any questions that you have about this or just life in general. I'd be honored to meet you guys. So good luck out there and have a good one.